Welcome to the Recovery Cast, brought to you by Hills and Rangers Private.
Hello again. Welcome back to another episode of the Recovery Cast, brought to you by Hills and Rangers Private. My name is Oliver and I'm a former addict in recovery. Today we have an interesting episode planned for you. October the 26th, we're going to do a reading to start with. But before that, I'm just going to do my little disclaimer. A little bit of information for those of you who may be tuning in for the first time. The Recovery Cast is a podcast created by people in recovery from addiction for people in recovery from addiction. There are many definitions of addiction, but we keep it simple. Addiction to us is when people use alcohol, drugs, or certain behaviours repetitively to their detriment. Basically, when it's a problem for them and their families. Therefore, an addict is not necessarily a needle-using junkie in a dark laneway, and an alcoholic is not necessarily a homeless man in a park. Recovery for us means using an active daily process or program to deal with alcohol use disorder, substance use disorder, or other behavioural addictions. People in recovery are committed to complete abstinence. This daily process is as important to being able to live normal lives as dialysis is for people with kidney problems. This podcast is meant as a support tool for those in recovery. I myself am a recovering drug addict. However, each day we will focus on a different perspective of recovery. Everyone who participates in this podcast is in an active recovery program. We're not affiliated with any one recovery methodology, and will focus on a variety of different types of recovery, including 12-step programs like AA and NA, Smart Recovery, Celebrate Recovery, Dharma Recovery, Cognitive Behavioural Therapy, and more. And a quick disclaimer, this podcast is intended to be informative. A podcast alone cannot support your sobriety and recovery, so we suggest it only as one component of a daily recovery routine. If you'd like some more information on what recovery is, go to www.rehab.melbourne. So on today's episode, we are going to do a reading from the Narcotics Anonymous book, The Just for Today, which is a book of daily readings about recovery. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a very, how do I describe this? A very difficult journey for me of what my life was like before I got into recovery, and the process of moving from being in active addiction and living those addictive behaviours and transitioning into a life of recovery and complete abstinence from all drugs and addictive behaviours. I'm fully aware that, maybe not all of my listeners are in recovery right now. Maybe you're in that place that I myself was in, where it's almost like looking over a wall, looking at the other side and thinking, wow, maybe life is better over there. Maybe it's possible for me to live a life of recovery and live a life that's free from addiction. I'm going to tell you how I did it and how I climbed over that wall. That's what this podcast is all about, is about showing you that it's possible and that it can be done, and that Hills and Rangers Private is a treatment facility that will help you get to that point. For me, it would have been impossible to get to that point without accepting treatment. And we're going to go into that a little bit today. But first, as I said, we're going to read from the Just for Today. So October the 26th, The Path to Self-Acceptance. the most effective means of achieving self-acceptance is through applying the 12 steps of recovery. Our addiction has been a source of shame to many of us. We have hidden ourselves from others, sure that if anyone got to know who we really were, they would reject us. NA helps us learn self-acceptance. Many of us find a great deal of relief just from attending meetings, hearing fellow addicts share their stories, and discovering that others have felt the same way we feel about ourselves. When others share honestly with us who they are, we feel free to do the same. As we learn to tell others the truth about ourselves, we learn to accept ourselves. Self-disclosure, however, is only the beginning. Once we've shared the things that make us uncomfortable with our lives, we need to find a different way to live. That's where the steps come in. We develop a concept of a higher power. We inventory our lives in detail and discuss our inventory with our sponsor. We ask the God of our understanding to remove our character defects and the shortcomings that are the source of our troubles. We take responsibility for the things we've done and make amends for them. And we incorporate all these disciplines into our daily lives, practicing these principles in all our affairs. By working the steps, we can become people we are proud to be. We can freely tell the truth about ourselves, for we have nothing to hide. Just for today, I will walk the path to self-acceptance. I will show up, tell the truth, and work the steps. Well, that was a very in-depth and complicated reading. It really talks about working the NA program as part of walking your path to self-acceptance. And for me, yes, that's what I did. That's my reality. I found a program that works for me. And these 12-step programs like NA and AA are an extremely helpful tool as part of a balanced recovery program. Basically, what they talk about in working the steps are, it's just a list of 12 steps that are a bunch of tasks that that we do in the fellowship that we work on, and they help to resolve some of the inner feelings and emotions and behaviours that led us to behave in those addictive behaviours in the first place. So for me, it was like undoing all the damage that I had and all that pain that was inside me, and it removed my obsession to use, and it removed my my desire to nullify my terrible feelings with substances. You know, it literally stopped me from wanting to change the way I felt with drugs. Now, of course, there are so many different ways to do it. That's not just one way of doing it, the 12 steps. And I'm going to talk about how I actually started on that journey. I'm not so concerned with the destination of what program you end up working or that later on down the track. We're going to talk today about how I actually accepted that help and got on that path to self-acceptance of being okay with who I am and being okay with where I was. It's a really amazing journey, and it started with one step, and that was accepting help and realizing that I couldn't do it on my own. I needed something to just start me off, because I was just languishing, and I had been for a long time in years and years of addiction and active addictive behavior. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more after the break.
You're listening to the Recovery Cast by Hills and Rangers Private. Now playing daily on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. For more shows, visit us at www.rehab.melbourne.
Okay, so welcome back to the Recovery Cast, brought to you by Hills and Ranges Private. You're with Oliver, and I was just talking about how I got to the point where I was ready to accept help and what that help actually looked like in the beginning. I, throughout the course of 10 years, went from someone who was a little bit of a party animal and someone that sort of seemed to behave normally, perhaps, to someone whose life was solely focused on maintaining my addiction. Now, my addiction, of course, I had substances that I would use, and really what they were, what isn't so important in the course of this episode, it doesn't matter what your addictive behavior is. It comes from the same place in the brain. Doesn't matter whether, think of 5 different drugs or 5 different addictive behaviors, whether, gambling, online shopping, whatever it is, relationships, sex. It's all the same. It all comes from this reward system in the brain, and someone who is suffering from addiction is unable to regulate the pursuit of those things, and it doesn't matter what they were. So for me, I was using drugs and alcohol for 10 years, and it got to the point where I was just doing it all day, every day, and I couldn't stop no matter how much I wanted to. And I could see my life being destroyed around me. I could see my career falling by the wayside. I could see opportunities being lost, and I could see my social life, my friends, my family. Everybody could just see that it was a complete train wreck. And yet I was still absolutely unable to do anything about it. It's baffling that I knew that it was slowly killing me, and yet I just couldn't stop. And my family staged multiple interventions where they sat me down and said, look, we really can see that you need help. And for a long time, I actually thought that I didn't have a problem, that I could stop whenever I wanted to, until, some kind of disaster would happen and I would say, all right, that's it, I'm not doing this anymore. And then I would actually try and stop. And I found that either in the beginning, I could stop for a little while, but I would always go back to my old ways. And then actually in the end, I was completely unable to stop at all. And I tried lots of things, but at the end of the day, I did have to accept that I couldn't do it on my own. And that was the first step for me in getting on a path to, as I said, over that wall to the other side of being in recovery and being completely abstinent. And for me, that step happened when I decided to go and accept treatment. I realized that by the end, I was trying to use my own willpower to stop, and it was completely impossible for me. And I just needed to take myself out of that environment where it was just me and my willpower fighting this enormous battle against my addiction. I had to be in a safe environment and be completely separated from the opportunity to follow my addictive behavior and act out on that every day. So that's where rehab came in for me. I am aware that there are, as many treatment solutions as there are, there's a lot of options out there. But for me, I found that I had to go and get treatment at a world-class treatment facility. And I see that, that is on offer for anyone at Hills and Ranges Private, that it's an environment that is safe, that you can go to remove yourself from your addiction and be in nature and take that first step into rebuilding your life. And that's what I did. I went to a treatment center, and that's what I did. I learned some tools, and I learned about what was on offer for after I left, of how I could change my life so that I could move on and learn to treat my addiction. And that was a tremendous first step for me. And I eventually went on to work out what worked for me, but that first step of actually accepting treatment was probably the biggest part of it. That was the hardest thing, to actually take that first step. And to me, I certainly know that it felt like I was staring up the cliff face of a mountain thinking, wow, I have to climb that. And I can either stay down here and not climb it, or I can climb it. And it basically didn't matter. All it took was just that one first step, and everything else seemed to fall into place. And that, the first things first, I just had to start on that journey of getting into recovery. And, now I can safely say that, and I'm proud to be over 4 years clean. And that's completely abstinent. And what my life is like today is just absolutely amazing in comparison to the very small and miserable life that I had before. Everything seems to just fall into place for me, and everything is easy. And when things come up that used to trouble me before, I can deal with it in a much healthier and more effective way. And I hear that time and time again from people in recovery who have followed and worked a number of different recovery programs, whether it be a 12-step recovery program or a mixture, or cognitive behavioral therapy, ongoing counseling, smart recovery. There's lots of ways out there to do it, but it just basically, once you take that first step, the rest does fall into place, and it's about continuing to work that program. And I learned, and the beginning of it for me was what I learned in rehab, and I learned the opportunities and ways to do it. I was shown how to do it, and then after that I just went out into the world and continued to work at it, because that's what I really wanted for myself, was to get better. It's possible. And the thing is that what I would say to somebody who perhaps has tried before is just never give up and keep going. I thought that it was never going to be a possibility for me at the beginning, but I now know that it's possible for anyone, and if I can do it, then anybody can. And yeah, it's the NA reading says, I will walk the path to self-acceptance. But I think for this episode, it's important to say, by seeking recovery, we will walk the path to a better life. And self-acceptance is a part of that, is I now accept who I am and I love who I am, whereas I used to hate myself. So it's just the most beautiful journey, and it's available to everyone. It's amazing. And if I could go back in time and say to myself, maybe a year or 2 years before, when I was thinking about it, I would say, just do it, Oliver. Don't delay, just make that change, make that phone call. It was the best thing I've ever done. And, it's not just for me. I think it'll be the best thing that anyone ever does, is to make that choice. So thanks for listening to another episode of The Recovery Cast. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to The Recovery Cast. For more, visit us at www.rehab.melbourne.